this morning is taken from the Valtorta, Volume 1. We're going to talk all about the visitation of the Wisemen, which, of course, when you see the plays from the grade school kids, it looks like it happened the moment Jesus was born. But according to the mystical writings, it probably happened sometime between 9 months and a year after Jesus was born. They had seen the star and had striven to understand its meaning. They were happy to give up the little sleep they usually granted themselves, and forgetting even their food, they devoted themselves entirely to studying the zodiac and the conjunctions of the stars, the time, the season, the calculation of the hours past, and of the astronomic combinations had told them the name and the secret of the star. Its name, Messiah. Its secret, the Messiah had come to our world. And they had set out to worship him, each of them unknown to the others, over mountains, across deserts, along valleys and rivers, traveling by night. They come towards Palestine because the star was moving in that direction. For each of them, from 3 different points on the earth, it was going in that direction. And then they met beyond the Dead Sea. God's will had gathered them there. They then proceeded together, understanding one another, notwithstanding that each spoke his own language. By a miracle of the Eternal Father, they were able to understand and speak the language of each other's country. They had gone together to Jerusalem because the Messiah was to be the King of Jerusalem, the King of the Jews. But over the sky of that city, the star had concealed itself, and they felt their hearts breaking with pain, and had examined themselves to ascertain whether they had failed to deserve God. But when their consciences reassured them, they had applied to King Herod and had asked him in which royal palace the King of the Jews was born, because they had come to adore him, the Messiah. And the king had gathered the chief priests and scribes and had asked them where the Messiah might be born. And they replied, in Bethlehem in Judah. And they had come towards Bethlehem, and as soon as they had left the holy city, the star had reappeared to them. And the night before their arrival in Bethlehem, its brightness had increased. The whole sky was ablaze. Then the star had stopped above this house, engulfing all of the light of the other stars in its ray. And they had understood that the divine newborn baby was there. Now they were worshiping him, offering him their gifts, and above all their hearts, which never ceased thanking God for the grace granted to them. Neither would they ever stop loving his Son, whose holy body they had now seen. In the meantime, here is the gold which befits a king to possess. This is one of the wise men speaking. Here is the incense which befits a god. And here, mother, here is the myrrh, because your child is a man as well as God, and he will experience the bitterness of the flesh and of human life, as well as the inevitable law of death. Our souls, full as they are of love, would prefer not to utter those words, and we would rather think that his flesh is also eternal, as is his spirit. But woman, if our writings, and above all our souls are right, he is your Son, the Savior, the Christ of God, and consequently to save the world, he will have to take upon himself the evil of the world, of which one of the punishments is death. This myrrh is for that hour, that which his holy flesh may not be subject to the rot of putrefaction, but may preserve its integrity until its resurrection. And on account of this gift, may he remember us and save his servants by allowing us to enter his kingdom. In the meantime, that we may be sanctified, will you, mother, trust your little one to our love, that his heavenly blessing may descend upon us while we kiss his feet. Mary, who has overcome the fright caused by the words of the wise man, and has hidden with a smile the sadness of the doleful illusion, offers the child. She lays him in the arms of the oldest one, who kisses him and receives his caresses, and he then hands him over to the other 2. Jesus smiles and plays with the little chains and fringes of the robes of the 3 magi. And he looks curiously at the open coffer full of a yellow sparkling substance, and he smiles at the rainbow produced by the sun shining on the brilliant top of the lid of the myrrh. They then hand back the child to Mary, and they stand up. Mary also gets up. They bow to one another, and after the youngest one has given an order to the servant who goes out, The three men go on speaking for a little while. They cannot make up their minds to depart from the house, tears shining in their eyes. At last they move towards the door, accompanied by Mary and Joseph. The element that I want to focus on really is when the wise man speaks to Mary and reiterates something that she knows, which is, we've brought these herbs when the time comes for your son's burial. It's very interesting. I mean, here's the child that's, maybe less than a year old, and the wise men are talking about, this sort of horrid experience that's going to happen, which is necessary as a part of the mission. So I want to tie back into what we were discussing in our Bible class. Because we know from this passage that Mary is jarred by the words, even though she knows the prophecy. Because at 8 days following the birth, when she brings Jesus, and Joseph and Mary bring Jesus to be circumcised, they meet this old Jewish man, Simeon, who reminds them also of the prophecy, his famous line, "And a sword shall pierce your heart." So there's no shortage of reminders for Mary of some tragedy that's going to happen. Of course, we know it's part of the mission, so in a sense, it needs to happen. But if we look at this as an internal teaching, as we mature into our expression, being able to express the Christ within us, the Wiseman gives a very interesting piece of guidance, which is, we are to take on the evil of the world. And this is very difficult and causes the soul, Mary, remember, representing the divine soul that is the nurturing component to the Christ, especially in the early phases. This is jarring. If somebody was to say to you, an element of yourself must die in order that you would resurrect into the higher Christ consciousness at a deeper level. Part of us probably says, okay, well, after the death, that'll probably be good. But I'm a little nervous about what this death is going to be like, and that's normal. And we had a kind of a cool experience in Bible class because in the first letter that Peter wrote to the exiles, I'm not sure what, there's a lot of foreign names where they lived, since I can't remember. He spoke that we are to honor the authority of the human institutions. So of course, we're in 2019, and the discussion very quickly went to our president, Donald Trump. And what I heard was, people's way of trying to make sense of, how do I live a life following the teachings of Christ and understand the purpose of, this man, Donald Trump, because it's a temptation to see him essentially as a beacon of evil, of selfishness, of deceit. And the discussion led, I believe, to people starting to see, oh, okay, I'm not in accord with the teachings here, but I don't know how to get there. Right, because something has not yet died. Something is fighting to maintain its position. Recently, I've seen 2 different movies that were about parents dealing with their teenager or early 20s sons who had become addicted to drugs. And you watch through these stories how the parent is so committed to loving their child, even though their child is lying to them, stealing from them, and basically killing themselves through the drugs. But there is a love that exists that is very clear. And that love sees something in the son that even the son may not be open to seeing. The goodness, the true nature, the potential. Remembering the child from the first day they were born to when they first started riding their bike to their friends and all the stuff that, remembering those times when they saw this child in their true element. And for some reason, they had gotten involved with drugs, and the drugs had affected their approach to life, such that the drugs become like the God, and they're willing to do anything to have the drug, including very hurtful things to their parents. But despite the pain that they caused their parents, in both these stories, the parents never lost the connection of love. Yes, at times they were incredibly frustrated. In times they were heartbroken, super angry, really disrespected. And yet, they turned in this very, very inspiring way, constantly trying to figure out how might I be of help to my child to move them off of this path that they have chosen, which is a path of destruction. If we can imagine God looking at our planet and looking at somebody who we are tempted to go, this is a horrible human being, and God going, this is my son. I can't see it any other way. And I remember my son when he was born. And I remember the times when he was, playing baseball or trying to ride a bike. And I remember the times when he sought his father's attention and it wasn't there. And when he asked a girl out and she rejected him. And when he was overweight as a child and the abuse that he took. And I just watched him suffer. And I watched him make choices as a way to adopt and adapt against the pain of life. And I see that he found a way to gain power because he has a mind and he has the ability to understand how to motivate certain people, how to influence them. And his behaviors do not make me do not please me. But I can't lose sight of the fact that this is my son. And I love him. And he has the free will to pursue his life as he wishes. But deep inside, I have a hope that he will awaken one day. To be able to see every human being as a son or a daughter of God, and to be their brother or sister, despite how much their behaviors irritate us, despite how much their behaviors create additional burdens in our lives, despite how much their deceit rubs against our sense of integrity, how much they made a fool of us and then blamed it upon us. I mean, we can go through a long list of behaviors that people do on this planet that directly cause us grief and pain and anguish. And Jesus showed us that we are to take on that evil because we have the capacity to absorb it. When I say absorb it, I don't mean that we are going to become it, but that we can receive it and we can pass it through to Jesus who diffuses it permanently. As opposed to what is taught in the world, which is I receive it and then I gather the strength and I fire it back at you. And you receive it and you fire it back at me. And we have war on the planet. We have hatred of brothers and sisters against each other. So this model of thinking has to die. And when it dies, or as it dies, we are left with the fear of I have to love that person. I have to stand in a room and speak on behalf of that person. I mean, we don't know what it's going to look like. Don't focus on what it's going to look like outwardly right now. Focus on whatever anguish you have to go through in order to release this attitude. The attitude is killing humanity. That brothers and sisters are against each other on this planet because we don't like our behaviors. They don't fit into what we believe are righteous behaviors. Yes, a lot of them are not pleasing behaviors to God. But how are things going to change if we continually segregate these people are heinous and these people are okay and these people are friends and these people are lovers and we keep nice clean boundaries up? Humanity cannot thrive when you understand that your perspective on somebody actually has an effect energetically on them. If you condemn somebody in your mind, your energy is something they, to a certain degree, have to overcome. Now, here on the path, we learn how to rise above that. I don't want you to be afraid that if somebody thinks negatively of you, that you will be oppressed by that. To a certain degree, as you know, when people think highly of you, you do tend to rise up. especially with your husband, your wife, your family, your employer, when they encourage you because they see your potential and they focus on the positive things, that creates an energy in which you can rise up. Ultimately, we are risen because of the Christ within. So there gets to be a point where that energy from the other people has a minimal effect. Because our consciousness has grown to a place where we are not subject so much. But I want you to think about the people that don't have any of that consciousness. And that if your perspective of them is to condemn them, to judge them, to push them aside because they're not worth your time, you're creating an additional burden for them that they're going to have to overcome. And if you could watch the challenges that they went through, that brought them to the place where they become crusty and prickly and difficult, you'll see that ultimately it comes down to being hurt and unloved. And so we want to be like that mother to the son that is ruining his life and ruining our lives, and we don't want to disconnect from the love. We know that we cannot necessarily bring somebody out of addiction. But that love may be the thin strand of dental floss that's the only thing that may keep them trying one more time. And that's worthwhile. So prepare yourself that if you walk this path, you will have many opportunities to experience the death of elements of yourself that have allowed you, to thrive to a certain degree by separating from people, by not associating with certain people. You'll have to learn, how do I maintain this Christ consciousness of loving everybody without being drained, without being depleted, without being taken advantage of? Okay, well, you got to learn that. We'll teach you how to do it, for sure. It's all about energy. It's all about boundaries. But ultimately, it's about love. That we have to maintain at the core that no human being is dismissible by their actions.